Today we're looking at factoring ax squared plus bx plus c without a greatest common factor. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to review by listing different sets of factor pairs. A factor pair are two numbers that multiply to equal whatever number you're looking for. So in example 1 we have the number 24. So for example 1 times 24 is 24, 2 times 12 is 24, 3 times 8 is 24, and 4 times 6 is 24. Now, I have another box. Now, we're going to also, there's some other numbers that equal 24. For example, if I have -1 and -24, those are factor pairs that equal 24. -2 times -12 equals -24. -3 times -8 equals -24, -4 times -6 also equal -24. If I have a negative number, a negative times a positive equals a negative. So if I have the number 1, I would multiply that by a -54 to get a -54. If I have a 2 times -27 equals -54. Now 3 also goes into -54. 3 times 18 would equal -54. And also 6 times 9. Both of these need to be negative. So we have 1, the first numbers are all positive, the second numbers are all negative. Now on the second box we're going to switch the numbers. So -1 is going to be multiplied by a positive 54. -2 is going to be multiplied by a positive 27. -3 is going to be multiplied by a positive 18. And -9 is going to be multiplied by a positive 6. The next step we're going to have is factoring trinomials. Factoring is a reversal of the distributive property, and it allows us to change the form of the equation ax squared plus bx plus c to the product of binomials. This is especially beneficial when we're trying to solve an equation and find the zeros. In order to understand factoring, it is important that you understand the distributive property. So when we have the distributive property, what happens is we take that 3x and we distribute it in. So I'm going to write it a little differently than we've seen in the past. The first step is 3x, and we're going to distribute that into the x plus 2. So we have 3x squared plus 6x. Then the next step is we're going to take that 4 and distribute it in. So again, I'm going to write it a little differently than we did when we multiplied the binomials, but we're going to take that 4 and distribute it in. 4 times x is 4x. 4 times 2 is 8. Now we're going to combine the like terms. The middle two terms, 6x plus 10 plus 4x, give us 10x plus 8. Now, this is how we multiply binomials. Now, we're going to reverse this process. They're going to give you something like 3x squared plus 10x plus 8, and you need to be able to go back to the original. Now, there is some process that we're going to have to use to uncombine these like terms, and we'll get into that in just a minute. But I'm just going to rewrite 3x squared plus those two numbers are 6x and 4x, and we will show you how you can get those numbers in a second. But the next step is we're going to use something we call a lightning bolt. And we're going to just kind of divide up these two sets of numbers. We have 3x squared plus 6x. They both have, we're looking for a number that will divide evenly into both 3 and 6. And since 3 is a factor of both 3 and 6, and both of these have an x, we're going to pull out a 3x, and then we're going to leave an x. We're going to, instead of timesing in, we're going to divide it out. So we're dividing 3x squared by a 3x, and the 3's cancel and one of the x's cancel, and we are just left with an x. And then we have plus 3 times 2 is 6. And then we have our x. So 3x times x is 3x squared. 3x times 2 gives us 6x. On our next step, on our next section, we're looking for what divides evenly out of 4x and 8. Well, there's a 4 and an 8, and both of those are divisible by 4. So we're going to factor out, whatever sign you have, you're going to bring that down. And they both have a 4 that we can divide out. So if I divide 4 by 4, it gives me just a 1x or just an x. And if I take my 8 and divide it by 4, I get a 2. Then we're going to take, and both of these have an x plus 2. And then if you look at these first two pieces, that's what I've underlined in scribblies. That would be our first section. Our first parentheses, and our second one is the ones that are the same, 3x plus 2. Okay, so if I'm looking here, this is the exact same problem I looked at here, 3x squared plus 10x plus 8. The first step is you're going to take and you're going to multiply the first and the last numbers together. So 3 times 8 is 24. We can identify, we are going to multiply our A and our C together. This is our first value and this is our last value. And then we just find all the factor pairs. And the factor pairs are anything that multiplies to 24. So 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, 4 and 6. And we're looking for two numbers that multiply to 24 and add to 10. Now when I look, 1 plus 24 is 25, 2 plus 12 is 14, 8 plus 3 is 11, and 6 plus 4 is 10. Since those add to 10, those are the numbers that we are looking for. And so that is how you get the 4 and the 6. So we take and we just take and make a lightning bolt. We look at the first two. They both have an x in common. And so we take our x out. We have 3x plus 4. Both 6 and 8 have a 2, and so we have 3x plus 4. We have an x plus 2 and a 3x plus 4 there. And if you have a 3x plus 4 and an x plus 2, those are going to be exactly the same as x plus 2 and 3x plus 4. Okay, so let's go ahead and do some practice problems. So first thing you're going to do is you multiply your 3, your 5, and your 6 to get 30. We're looking for two numbers that multiply to 30 and add to this middle number of 17. So I have 1 and 30, 2 and 15, and once I find the two numbers that add to equal 17, I can stop there. I also could do 3 and 10. Would also be a factor, but once you find the number you're looking for, there's no reason to keep going. So now I'm going to uncombine the like terms. Instead of 17x, 2x plus 15x equals the 17x. We add in our lightning bolt. I look at the first two and I think to myself, what's the biggest thing that I can divide out of 5x squared and 2x? So they both have an x, so I'm going to divide the x out. I have a 5x left plus 2. Now I look at 15 and 6. What's the biggest number that I can think of that goes into both 15 and 6? Well, 3 does. And you want to kind of just look and see if there's any other numbers. If you take the smallest number, 6 won't go into 15, but 3 will, and that's the next biggest number that goes into 6. So we're going to pull a 3 out of that second set. Whatever sign you have, you're going to bring that down and then put your 3. we divide each of these by 3. So 15 divided by 3 is a 5, and then we have an x left. 6 divided by 3 is a 2. Now you can kind of double check that you did it right if both of those are the same. Now I'm going to just put some kind of scribbly underlines. X plus 3, that is going to be our first factor. And our second one is whatever's in these parentheses, and they're going to match 5x plus 2. Now if you want, you can double check by timesing this out. X times 5x is 5x squared. X times 2 is 2x. 3 times 5 is 15x. That adds together to be 17x, and you can find those numbers 2x and 15x here, and then 3 times 2 is going to give us that 6. So you can always check to make sure that you have these correct. Okay, number 2, if there's not a number in the front, it's a 1. 1 times 30 is 30. We're looking for two numbers that multiply to 30 and add to 11. So 1 and 30, 2 and 15, those add to 17. 3 and 10, and then we have 5 and 6. And 5 and 6 add together to equal the 11. So those are going to be the two numbers that we're looking for. I bring my x squared down. I uncombine the like terms to be 5x and 6x. And then I bring the 30 down. So everything's the same. We've just uncombined the like terms there. We add in our lightning bolt. Our first two, we have x squared and a 5x. Now, there's no numbers that they have in common, but they both have an x. So we're going to pull the x off, pull it out. We have an x plus 5 in our parentheses. Whatever sign you have here, we have a plus 6x. We're going to bring that down. Now 6 and 30, 6 will go into 30, so that is going to be the biggest number that will go into both of those. 6 times x is 6x, and 6 times 5 is 30. You can check to make sure that you've got these correct by if those match. Those need to match. Our first factor is going to be an x plus 6. Our second factor is going to be an x plus 5. And you can always double check again. X times x is x squared, plus 5x and plus 6x add to 11x, and 6 times 5 is going to be 30. So if you check it and it gets you back to the original, if you times it out, then you know you did it correctly. Okay, number 3, we're going to have 8 times 4 is 32. We're looking for two numbers that multiply to 32 and add to negative 33. So we're adding in some negative numbers now. 1 and 32, those add to be 33, but I'm looking for a negative 33. Now if I do a negative 1 times a negative 32, that's still a positive 32, but when I add them together, it's going to equal a negative 33. So we're going to uncombine the like terms. We bring our 4x squared down. We have a minus 1x, a minus 32x, and a plus 8. Put in our lightning bolt. Look at the first two. They both have an x in common that we can pull out. We have x, and then if I take an x out of the first one, I have 4x left, minus 1. Whatever sign you have, you bring it down, and then you're going to look into 32 and 8. Now 8 goes into both 8 and 32, so that is the number that we're going to pull out. We're going to divide out of both of these. 8 times 4 is 32. And now make sure it's a positive 4, because a negative 8 times a positive 4 will give us this negative 32x. Now a negative 8 times a negative 1 gives us a positive 1. But if I had to put a plus 1 here, it would give me a negative here. So make sure you get the right sign. If you have a negative number, what it does is it changes the sign. Now I kind of scribbled these two. Underneath, that's my first one, x minus 8. My second one are the ones that are the same inside the parenthesis, 4x minus 1. And those would multiply to be 4x squared minus 33x plus 8. Number 4, we have 5. 8 times 5 is 40. we're looking for two things that multiply to 40 and add to negative 22. So I've got 1 and 40, 2 and 20. 1 plus 40 is 41, and 2 plus 20 is 22, but I'm looking for a negative 22. So if I make both of these negative, a negative 2 times a negative 20 is a negative 40, or a positive 40, and a negative 2 times a negative 20 is a negative 22. So those are the two numbers we're going to uncombine here. So we have 5x squared minus 2x minus 20x plus 8 with our lightning bolt. Now I look at the first two, they both have an x in common, so we pull the x out. I have 5, I take one of the x's away, minus 2. Whatever sign you have, you bring it down. Now I want to look at 20 and 8. Now 8 doesn't go into 20, the next biggest number that will go into 8 is a 4. So 4 will go into 20. So that's the biggest number that's going to go into both of them. If I divide them both by a negative 4, negative 20 divided by negative 4 is a 5, and then I have an x. 8 divided by negative 4 is a negative 2. Now my first factor is my x minus 4. My second factor is my 5x minus 2. Number 5, I'm going to take first times last. 5 times negative 6 is negative 30. I'm going to look for any two numbers that multiply to negative 30 and add to negative 7. Now, if this is a negative number, kind of like here, if I have a negative number, one is going to be positive and one is going to be negative. Now, if I look at this middle number, it's a positive 7. So the bigger number is going to be positive and the smaller number is going to be negative. So 1 times positive 30, that doesn't give us, when we add those, that doesn't give us 7. Negative 2 and positive 15. Negative 3 and positive 10. 10 minus 3 is 7. So those are the two numbers we're going to use. So I have 5x squared minus 3x plus 10x minus 6. So we're bringing our first and last down and we're uncombining the middle two numbers. We add in our lightning bolt. I look at the first, I'm just looking at the first two. 5 and 3 don't have anything in common except a 1, and 1 we don't really bring it out because everything has a 1 in common, but they both have an x. So I'm going to pull that x out. 5x minus 3. Now on the second two, whatever sign you have, you bring that down. Now 6 won't go into 10. The next biggest number that goes into 6 is a 3. That doesn't go into 10 either, but a 2 does. So we're going to divide a 2 out of both 10 and 6. 10 divided by 2 is a 5. I have an x. And negative 6 divided by 2 is a negative 3. I have an x plus 2, and then my second number is the 5x minus 3. You can times this out. X times 5x is 5x squared minus 3x and plus 10x are our numbers here. Those add together to be 7x, and 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. So you can always check to see if you got it right. Now looking at number 6, look, we have some different letters, some different variables here. 8 times negative 3 is negative 24. We are going to find two things that multiply to negative 24, and if you have a negative number, if you're multiplying two numbers, one needs to be positive, one needs to be negative. Now we're trying to add to be a positive 2. So since that's a positive number, we want the bigger number to be positive. So we have 1, negative 1, and positive 24, negative 2 and 12, negative 3 and 8, negative 4 and 6. And when I add 6 minus 4 together, that gives me the positive 2. So those are going to be my two numbers there that I'm going to uncombine the like terms to be. So I bring my first number down. I have a minus 4y and a plus 6y, and then a minus 3 with the lightning bolt. Okay, now if I look at the first two, we've got an 8 and a 4, the biggest number that goes into both 8 and 4 is 4. So we're gonna divide a 4 out of both of these numbers. They also both have a y, so we're gonna pull a y out as well. So we have a 2y minus 1. And then plus, we bring whatever sign we have down. We want to think of a number that goes into both 6 and 3. Well, 3 goes into both of those. So I'm going to pull a 3 out. I'm going to divide 6 by 3 gives me 2y. Divide negative 3 divided by 3 is a 1. I have a 4y plus 3 is my first factor. My second one is what's in this parenthesis here, which is 2y minus 1. Okay, we have b's in number 7. We do the same thing. 3 times negative 4 is negative 12. I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to negative 12 and add to a negative 1. If there's not a number in front of the b, it's a 1. Now, since we're looking for a negative number, the bigger number is going to be negative. We want a net result of a negative number. So I'm going to have 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4, but the bigger number will be negative if I want to end up with a negative number here. Now, if I look at these numbers, the two that add to be a negative 1 would be a 3 and a negative 4. So I'm going to uncombine the like terms. I have 3b squared plus 3b minus 4b minus 4. I add in my lightning bolt. Now the first two, they have a 3b in common. So we're going to pull the 3 and the b out. The first one has 1b left plus, but the second one, we've taken all the 3b out. Now, sometimes people don't want to write anything here because it's like, well, I already took the 3b out. But if we do that, if I redistribute, 3b times b is 3b squared, and 3b times nothing would give us a 0 here. So I would lose that 3b. So what I need to have here is a 1, because when I multiply that 3b times 1, I get the 3b back. Otherwise, it just kind of disappears. So make sure you have a 1 there. Whatever sign you have, you bring it down. Now I need to take out a number here. Both of them have a 4 in common, so I'm going to bring out the 4. I have a b minus. Again, if I pull the negative 4 out, I need that 1 there. Negative 4b times negative 4 times b is negative 4b, and negative 4 times negative 1 is a positive 4, not a negative 4. So make sure you put a positive here so that when you times these together, you get back what you had. And you want these to be the same. So I'm going to have 3b minus 4, and I have a b plus 1. We are going to take our first number and last number and multiply those together. 9 times 8 is 72, so I have a negative 8, so it's negative 72. I'm looking for two numbers that add to be negative 6. Now, since this is a negative 72, we have two numbers, one positive, one negative. And because this is a negative number here, the bigger number is going to be negative. So we have 1 and 72, 2 and 36, 3 and 24, 4 and 18. 5 does not go into 72 because it's not, doesn't end in 0 or 5. 6 times 12. And the bigger number is negative, and when I do that, I notice that negative 12 plus 6 gives me the negative 6. So those are the numbers I'm going to use. I bring down my 9z squared. I have a plus 6z. I have a minus 12z and a minus 8. And I put in my lightning bolt. Now 9 and 6, if I look at those numbers, the biggest number that will go into both 9 and 6 is 3. 6 won't go into 9, but the next biggest number that goes into 6 is 3, and it goes into 9. So 3 I know is going to be our biggest number. They both also have a z that we can pull out. Now 3 times 3 is 9, but we also need another z to get our z squared. And 3z times 2 gives me 6z. Whatever sign you have, bring it down. Now I look into 12 and 8. The biggest number that both of those have in common is a 4. 4 times 3 is 12. And negative 4 times positive 2 gives me an 8. Now to write our final answers, we have 3z minus 4 is our first section. Our second one is a 3z plus 2. And that is whatever matches in that second, those two parentheses. Okay, now number 9, it's an equation. And when you have an equation, you're trying to get what x equals. Now before, if it just says to factor, we are just getting the parentheses here. We are not solving the equation. Number 9, we're going to start by just kind of ignoring this equals 0, and we're going to factor the left. Now we cannot solve this with pluses and minuses, but if we get it in factored form, that's two things that are multiplying together to equal 0, we can solve it. So I'm going to first factor. We're going to ignore the equals 0. I'm going to take 3 times 8 times 3 is 24, and I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to 24, add to 10. Now 24 is positive, so they both either need to be all positives or all negatives, but they're adding to be a positive 10. So we want two positive numbers, 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, 4 and 6. Now sometimes people will look at things like 2 and 12 and be like, well, if I took negative 12 and positive 12 minus 2, that equals 10. The problem with that is a negative 12 or a positive 12 times a negative 2 gives us a negative 24, and we need a positive 24. So they both need to be positive. If I add 6 and 4, I get 10. So instead of the 12 and 2, I'm going to use the 6 and the 4. I uncombine the like terms, the 10x to 4x and 6x. I add in my lightning bolt. I look at the first two. They both have an x. I'm going to factor the x out. I have 3x plus 4. I bring the plus sign down. Now 6 and 8, they both are both divisible by 2, and that's the biggest number that both of them will be divisible by. I divide a 2 out of both the numbers. 6 divided by 2 is 3. I keep my x, and 8 divided by 2 is a 4. And when I do that, I have these two pieces that are the same. So I take my first two spots, x plus 2, and my second ones are the 3x and the 4. Okay. Now we're not quite done on this one because we're trying to solve this equation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set I've got two things that are multiplied to equal 0. And if two things multiply to equal 0, either the first one has to equal 0 or the second piece has to equal 0. Now the first one's pretty easy to solve. I just minus 2 from both sides. And so x equals a negative 2. On the second one, I minus 4 from both sides. The 3x equals negative 4. I divide by 3. And so x equals negative 4/3 would be my second answer. So this has two answers. And we can know that because of this x squared. If you have s squared, the fundamental theorem of algebra says whatever your degree of your polynomial is will tell you how many solutions that you're going to have. Now, when we're solving the equation, we want them to set equal to 0. That's the only way we can solve the quadratic. Now on number 10, it is not set equal to 0, it is set equal to 8. So first thing we need to do is we need to set it equal to 0. So I'm going to minus 8 from both sides. I have 15x squared plus 14x minus 8 equals 0. Okay, so we're going to take and we're going to multiply our first and our last piece. 15 times 8 is 120. So we are looking for two things that multiply to 120 and add to 14. So let's start 1 and 120, 2 and 60, 3 and 40, 4 and 30, 5 and 24, 6 and 20, 8 and 15. Now I'm looking and I'm seeing 20 and 6. This is a negative 120. I didn't put that in the beginning, but I'm trying to get a positive 14. So one is going to be positive, one's negative. And since this middle number is positive, we are going to put a positive 20 and a negative 6, which gives us the 14. So we uncombine the like terms. Add in our lightning bolt. Now 15 and 6, the biggest number that goes into both of those is a 3. 3, I can pull an x out. 3 times 5 is 15. I have an x. 3 times negative 6 is negative 2. Whatever sign you have, bring that down. 4 is the biggest number that goes into both 8 and 20. 4 times 5x gives us 20x. And 4 times negative 2 gives us negative 8. Now we have these two are the same. Our first parenthesis is going to be 3x plus 4. Our second one is going to be 5x minus 2. We set those equal to 0, and now we can solve it because we have two things that multiply together to equal 0. And so either the first one equals 0, 3x plus 4 equals 0, or 5x minus 2 equals 0. So we're going to minus 4 from both sides, divide by 3, and so x equals negative 4/3. On the second one, we add 2 to both sides, divide by 5, and so x equals 2/5. So those would be the two answers, that's two solutions that would make this equation true.